السلام عليكم Mrs. حرمات طلبة عزيزlar. Today inshallah we are going to continue our course about the global strategic management. As we know, the companies or global companies that work in different countries, different markets, so they can face or confront a lot of different cultures. So with this new important topic, the cross-cultural management, how these global companies manage their business cross-culture or between the different cultures and different peoples and different regions and locations. There is a lot of details we can see in the next slides, inshallah. So, as we know that globalization affects the management of the two key sources of corporations, the human resources and the financial resources. But before addressing the problems of the global human resources management and financial resources management, we need to explore the underlying complexity that arises in human relations as a result of international cultural differences. So, So this chapter represents the impact of the cultural differences on the management of cross-cultural teams in the international negotiations and on the business practices. We'll see in this chapter understanding the meaning of the culture and the various layers of culture, and also we will try to identify the key characteristics of the international cultural differences and also to understand different management issues associated with cultural differences and understand the managerial issues associated with the cross-cultural teams and how cultural differences affect the international negotiations and identifying the key characteristics of an economic culture, and finally to be aware of the differences in ways of conducting business across cultures. So our chapter will be divided into three main topics: the cross-cultural management and the national culture, and finally the impact of culture on uh, managing the global business. Let's start with the first topic with some questions that or the main challenges that global firms have to confront in the different cultures during doing business globally. So we have to think about whether the various players in the global ecosystem give the same meaning to the same concepts, behaviors, or attitudes or not. Do the employees around the world get the same message when policies are enacted, memos exchanged, or rewards distributed? Do the customers of the same age, organization, and wealth value similar product or service attributes? Do the employees in multinational teams share the same assumptions and causal relationships about decision parameters? And when a contract or business venture or a loan is being negotiated, do the parties understand each other's silent language? We will see the answer of these questions and the meaning of these different terms in the next slides. So these are the questions that all global companies have to address in their cross-cultural and management competencies. As the global corporations are by nature organizations that interact with customers, employees, partners, and suppliers from different national cultures. So let's start with the definition of culture. What is culture? There is no universal definition of culture, but there's many different definitions. Like, for example, some scholars define culture as a shared pattern of behavior or system of shared meaning or understanding, or a set of basic assumptions, shared solutions to universal problems handed down from one generation to another. All these definitions have in common the concept that culture is shared and imply an implicit decoding of an underlying pattern of cause and effect relationships, whether cognitive, like meaning, assumptions, or attitudinal, emotional, like behavior, or decisional, like the solutions. So instead of a definition, some scholars have attempted to describe the content of culture. So this figure shows three major layers of culture. There is the basic assumptions and meanings, the values, beliefs, and preferences, and the behavior. If you start from the bottom of this hierarchy, the basic assumptions and meaning are invisible, unconscious, taken for granted. Like, for example, the concept of time is limited, all men are equal, and so on. The second stage, we can see the values, beliefs, preferences, which are explicit and declared. Like the concept of time is money, authority has to prevail, and so on. And at the top of the hierarchy, you can see the behavior, which is most observable and manifest. For example, like behavior like looking at watch or banging on the table during business or during meeting, and so on. So, if we take it in ascending order, the basic assumptions according to this hierarchy, the basic assumptions, and we can see more detailed examples, are the least visible and probably the most entrenched since they deal with ingrained models of understanding, meanings, and causal relationships that have been shaped by history, transmitted through the educational process to children and students, and so on. For example, the religious faith and assumptions about human nature belong to this category. So the basic assumptions are difficult to change in adults. The second stage is the values, beliefs, and preferences, which are the explicit expression of assumptions incorporated into a set of codes or norms that provide some sort of ethical and normative governance mechanisms for social groups. So values can be changed to some extent by new information, but they are different than the basic assumptions uh, as they can be changed. How? By new information. If you have new information, you can change your beliefs and preferences and so on, and also the confrontation with new situations. For example, a manager who or whose assumption about human nature is that men or women are fundamentally greedy. Greedy means they like money too much and so on. So this manager or this kind of manager will probably believe that only materialistic rewards will motivate the employees. So this is how the cultural perception affects the way of doing business and management and so on. So he may change this belief. This manager will may change his beliefs when exposed to situations where people sacrifice financial reward for others' benefits. And the last stage is the behavior, which is the most visible part of the iceberg. It is manifested in action and can be modified through education as well as through some forms of conditioning, as a behavioral change doesn't imply a modification of beliefs or assumptions. An autocratic leader is not democratic. يعني autocratic is he thinks that he is the only one in control and his opinion is the correct opinion and so on. So this is an autocratic leader. He may be told to change his style of leading meeting, although he still believes that employees have to be told. This is a belief based on the assumption that human beings are fundamentally divided into two groups who, uh, who are born to be leaders and the others who are passive followers. So in such a case, behavioral change will be superficial. So in the management field that by nature is concerned with economic achievement of social groups which are companies, the culture will be manifest in four dimensions: the corporate culture, the industry culture, the professional culture, and the national or ethnic culture. Let's take each one in details. The corporate culture, which is this type of dimension that the accumulated assumptions, the values, beliefs, and behavioral norms resulting from the history of the company, which is good and bad experiences, its existing and past leadership imprint, the legacy of charismatic CEOs, its ownership structure, which is a family-owned company or publicly listed company or private company or government-owned company, and also its size, which either it is big company or small company. The second dimension is the industry culture, which means that any rules derived from the professional norms of a particular industry, like, for example, heavy manufacturing, services, oil and gas industry, etc. So it's about the industry. Like, for example, in this photo, and in heavy manufacturing industries, for example, there is a professional norm that the workers have to wear this kind of safety clauses, and so on. The third dimension uh, is the professional culture, which is derived from the training and professional norms and constraints of different functions within the corporations. For example, the accountants, the researchers, production personnel, sales and marketing people, etc. So each one of these functions, like the accountants, for example, they have their own professional norms and their own constraints, and so on. So it is about the professional culture. The fourth dimension is the national or the ethnic culture, which is derived from the national or religious or ethnic origin of the citizens or social groups. As we can see, maybe it's about the how they were according to their religion, or maybe divided according to the color and social group, and so on. So this is the four dimensions of culture. Now we finished the first topic about the cross-cultural management. Let's move to the second uh, topic, which is the national culture. As the global companies and any other firms are confronted with corporate, industrial, and professional cultural diversity. But this complexity is compounded by national and ethnic differences stemming from their worldwide implantation. So, the systematic analysis of national cultural differences is a business management context is the result of four main streams of research, which are the ethnological research, the silent language differences, and the managerial values and assumptions, which are the work-related values differences, and the values orientations differences, and management assumptions differences. And the third mainstream is the countries clusters, which is the grouping of nations according to the similarities of cultural traits. And the fourth mainstream is the economic cultures differences, how business systems are organized and business interactions are governed. So let's talk about the first mainstream, the ethnological research, and maybe we will continue the next three mainstreams in the next lesson because of time. So the first mainstream is the ethnological research, or the silent language differences. What we mean by the silent language? The cultures differ in the way they communicate through non-verbal means. When we talk about verbal means, it's like speaking together so you can understand from the language and so on. This is the verbal mean of communication. But the silent language concerns with the non-verbal means of communication, like these six identifications about the silent language: the time, the space, and the language of material goods, agreement, friendship, and context. When we talk about each one, the perception of time, we are talking about the silent language. So, the perception of time, how different cultures can look for time or think about time as they differ according to their perception of time. Yani, for example, time can be seen as sequential and scarce, as in the case of Germanic culture. You know about scarce and scarcity and so on. So, in this culture, in Germany, time is scarce. How can this affect the business and so on? This leads to the quest for preciseness, punctuality, and deadline keeping in this culture. But other cultures see time as fluid and circle and abundance, as in the Arabic countries or ASEAN or Middle East, where people will be less punctual and not really disturbed by delays and postpones. They don't have any problem with that. Also, the perception of space, as differences in the perception of space, space between each other, and so on, relates to the concept of social distance, as we are doing now in the Corona time, that measures not only the length of physical proximity, how close they are physically to each other in social interaction, but also of emotional intimacy. As, for example, in the high social distance cultures, people will tend to avoid physical and emotional proximity, like in British culture. In low social distance cultures, the Latin countries, for example, people will see no objection to physical contact and sharing of emotions. The third item in in silent language is the language of material goods. The language of material goods is linked to the importance attached to financial wealth as a sign of status, as a materialistic trait of Americans, for example. In contrast, other status signifiers such as family, education, or seniority. Fourth, the agreement, how you agree or approve for something. The silent language of agreement quite often opposes Western cultures to Eastern cultures. For example, in the Western societies, most agreements or disagreements are explicitly stated. And they have to state the approval in an explicit way and documented in writing. But in Eastern cultures, verbal and sometimes ambiguous agreements are accepted. You just can use speaking or verbal means to express the acceptance or approval or agreement. For example, in Indonesia, it is often difficult for a business partner to say a straight no or say no in a clear way, but he can say maybe, which is in fact have the same negative connotation. Then friendship, the last item in silent language, which is built and maintained quite differently in the different cultures. As in some societies, one can make friends rapidly, but at the expense of superficiality, and the friendship may not last long. So in these societies, you can make friends so fast, but it doesn't last for long. But the silent language of this sort of friendship may shock people, other people coming from societies where friendships are not so quickly built, but last longer. In the other societies, in other cultures, friendship cannot easily and quickly be built, but at the same time, when it is built, it lasts for long time. Finally, the context. as a silent language of context attaches to the importance given to the person rather than the content in a communication. The person and the content, as in the high context societies, mostly the Asian, the South American, or Latin, the important part of an interaction is the person, as with whom you are talking or communicating, and so on, and the emphasis given to the settings, the ambience, and the ceremonial. But in the low context societies like Anglo-Saxon, Nordic, or Germanic, the what dominates the communication. It's about what you are saying, it's about the content, not the person. So, hence the importance attached to the written documents in these societies and to the technical specifications. So, now we finished the first mainstream in the uh, national culture, which is the ethnological research or the silent language differences. We are going to continue, inshallah, in next lessons, the other four mainstreams, the managerial values and assumptions, the countries clusters, and the economic cultural differences. Okay, so thank you, goodbye, and good luck.